was described to me how people with various type of businesses found their businesses would improve because they happen to be in politics, and they found a way to do favors for one group, and then
Right.
those other groups would do favors for you. I mean, it's that kind of transactional nature is common to politics, but I found it distasteful because it undermined, to me, it would seem that it would undermine my freedom to act, to
Mhm.
be able to speak out.
It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Dennis Kucinich to the show. He's a 2004 and 2008 presidential candidate. Of course, you remember that, for the Democratic Party. Ohio Congressman from 1997 to 2013, former chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and author of the new book, The Division of Light and Power. This is a big work, 650 pages in print and even more electronically. I can't wait to take a dive into it myself because he has really documented all sorts of interesting things from his political career. Dennis, welcome. It's great to have you.
Jason, thank you for the invitation. Great to be on your show. I'm so appreciative, and I know how diverse your viewers are, and that's why this is a great opportunity to have a chat. Thank you.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you. The pleasure is all mine. So tell us about the book. I mean, you said off air before we started, this was amazing when you told me this, that this was really a 40-year labor of love to produce this book, huh?
Exactly. And, I started in November 1979 to tell the story of a young councilman who got into politics with every good intention, with a strong set of ethics, and then found that I was walking into a place where deals were constantly being cut against the people, where other politicians wanted to show me how to make money, where in campaigns a suitcase full of cash suddenly appeared for my discretion, of course, were turned away. But then as my journey develops, I learn about the secret, and later on not so secret, underhanded attempt by a private company to take over a utility, not through fair competition, but through subterfuge, through sabotage, through dirty tricks, and through political games. So I document it all in the book. Ultimately, it's about democracy. It's about whether or not the decisions we make as people are going to be reflected by our government officials. And I raised the question right at the beginning: where's City Hall? Is it just a building downtown, or is City Hall reflected in centers of power that most people aren't familiar with, whether it's banks, utility monopolies, the mob,
and now big tech companies? And I want to ask you about that one for sure, because
you're absolutely right.
The latest one in the spotlight, and rightfully so. Dennis, is it just that there's an inherent conflict of interest between our representatives and the people when lobbyists come in with all sorts of favors and cronyism? I mean, can that ever be fixed?
Well, here's the thing. It's about human nature, ultimately. People go into government for different reasons. I will say that if you don't have your own sense of power, having a certificate of election does not confer that upon you. If you look for interest groups to bless your candidacy, or somebody to hand you money and to make you a strong person, you're lost. Mm-hmm. And that's actually where our politics have gone. We really need to capture the classic sense of representation for the purpose of public service, and not for an opportunity to make an extra buck, or to turn your life's work over to an interest group which will exploit your position but leave you basically as a shell morally. So this is a spiritual journey as well as a political one that I'm talking about.
Is most of this favoritism and really direct payments of money, is it sort of put toward re-election campaigns, or is it straight into the pockets of politicians?
Well,
or just
who knows? Today, the conventional way is to throw tons of money into an election. That's a conventional way to buy an office. But we also know stories, and I didn't make any charges in the book of payoffs, but we also know that these things do happen, and that sadly, and that people lose their way. They go astray once they get into higher office. And I'll tell you, I mean, if getting elected to office never made anyone a better person.
Yep.
If you didn't bring your own code with you about what you're for, it's a tough place to be able to pick one up because there's so many competing interests. And I write in the book how when I first came in, how all the older politicians, most of them old enough to be my grandparents at the time, would take me close and say, hey, you know, you got it made, kid. You're in here. You're so young. You could be anything you want to be. And, you know, and there's a lot of opportunities here. All you have to do is play ball. And it was described to me how people with various type of businesses found their businesses would improve because they happen to be in politics, and they found a way to do favors for one group, and then those other groups would do favors for you. You know, I mean, it's that kind of transactional nature is common to politics, but I found it distasteful because it undermined, to me, it would seem that it would undermine my freedom to act, to be able to speak out. If all of a sudden I have to run head on into somebody who did me a favor.
Right.
Whoa, you know, it's like, I don't need any favors. I was elected, and in the book, I talk about a young councilman who challenged the status quo. I talk about the next step, a clerk of courts who organized a campaign to block the sale of our municipal electric system. And Jason, when that happened, because there was so much money involved, I had a high-power rifle that went through my house and missed my head by a fraction. You know, this book is really about high stakes, and it's about whether or not any of us, you know, those of us who are in public life, but you know, in private life, people have their own challenges, are ready to take a stand for something they believe in.
Yeah, no question about it. You know, as the saying goes, power corrupts and absolute power, absolutely, right?
Yeah, that Lord, I think it was Lord Acton wrote that. You know, again, Jason, we're talking about human nature.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not a holier than thou. I'm not a goody two shoes. But when I see something that doesn't look right and it feels wrong based on my own ethical training, I say, nah, you know, I don't want to do that. And as I found going into City Hall, you know, the way of the world is very powerful, and it just tries to draw people in, and even some really good people get pulled into things.
Sure.
They, you know, everyone has their own vulnerabilities, and you know, in politics, when you're in it, somebody finds it out, and if you're particularly vulnerable financially, you're going to be a kept person after a while. Right.
No, they definitely figure out how to exploit that and how to tempt, and that temptation sometimes is almost impossible to resist, I'm sure, because you know, people have their own life pressures that they have to take care of. You know,
I note the title of your show, Creating Wealth. And, you know, I've always felt that some people in politics have a misunderstanding of the nature of the material world. Because if you think that there's only wealth for a few and not for everyone, you can be driven into cutting deals in the moment and forgetting, and this is my belief, I've never had a chance to talk to you about it, that the potential for creating wealth is unlimited. The universe keeps expanding. Right. And that, but for me, one cannot have wealth divorced from spiritual principles. And this goes a little bit deeper philosophically, where spirit moves into matter and sanctifies matter. And matter then can be blessed and keep expanding. So I think that we've got to be very careful of separating ourselves from the potential of building wealth in the material world, but we should not do it if it's devoid of spiritual principles.
Yep, I totally agree. You know, it's unfortunate, but as a famous singer says, you know, we live in a material world, right?
Yeah, well, we do. But you know, if we think that's all there is, That's wow, that's pretty tough.
That's dangerous thinking. And if the thinking is one is only going to be held accountable to the present moment or a government or that kind of thing, that's just a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Talk to us about the Chinese Communist Party, something there that you came across, and I think you wrote about it in the book, right?
I didn't address it there at all. Essentially, the book is not ideological. It doesn't get into left, right. It doesn't get into liberal, conservative,
Uh-huh.
Democrat, Republican. When I was elected mayor of Cleveland, Jason, I was elected as an independent.
Mm-hmm.
I beat both political parties, and the
Right.
Democratic machine was really powerful. And
Uh-huh.
to be able to win that election, I had to go right to people's concerns about what they're, about safety, what
Yeah.
they're paying for utility bills, how they're paying taxes, and government waste.
It's
That was
amazing to win as an independent. I mean, that's not common, is it?
no, but let me give you an example. Because I had an independent approach, I was able to cut city spending by 18%
Mm-hmm.
in my term without reducing city services. And we a dime. I mean, one reason is because the banks cut our credit, but we didn't borrow any money, and we ran the city on a cash basis. There's been too many cities in America that's been able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But government has a lot of waste, a lot of fraud, a lot of abuse, and I, had a not only desire but some expertise in attacking it, eliminating it, saving the taxpayer dollars, and using that money for things that really matter. But I did it without a partisan approach because to me, I don't care if anyone's a Democrat or Republican. I care if they're honest, if they're true. And I think if a good American, as Milt Schumann was quoted in the book, good Americans are honest and true. They don't cheat their country. They don't cheat their city.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the moral lessons in this book taught to me by people who had been involved in politics were very important for a young person. I mean, keep in mind, when I was elected, I was 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
When I was
Wow,
elected to
that
council.
is amazing.
I mean,
And that
but when
was city council or mayor?
yes, and
Yeah, it wasn't
city
mayor, right?
council, and
Okay.
31 when I became America's youngest big city mayor.
Right. Wow.
And so, the other lesson in this book is that young people can make a difference. You don't have to sacrifice your principles. You don't have to check your ethics at the door when you walk into a room. That the way that you look at the world has validity, but you have to be willing to take a stand.
Yeah. Very good. Dennis, we alluded to it earlier, but I really want to make sure we talk about the concentration of wealth issue, and especially these huge companies that seem to be running the world now. You talked about the utility company and the monopolistic nature there and so forth. But what do you think of the present climate with these? I mean, the S&P is just largely the value of a couple, just a small number of companies, not 500.
And
right?
and that's it's in the finance aspect of it. It's not in manufacturing and things that America used to be really.
But now it's gone even from, I mean, we have an economy that is incredibly financialized. Everything is just over financialized, at least in my opinion. But right. But these tech companies have really replaced the direct finance companies as they have just an incredible amount of leverage. And it's kind of this winner take all system that we've somehow gotten to, where just a few companies get all the funding. They get the venture capital, they get the mezzanine financing, they get the IPO funding. Is that right? What do we do about it? And then now we have them controlling our thoughts. It's
look, I share your concerns, and the availability of capital is critical. How it's formed, people have to ask that. Today, capital can seemingly be drawn out of thin air and have no underlying value. And when, as with the subprime meltdown, we saw wealth pyramided with collateralized debt obligations through mortgage-backed securities. And when the banks gave loans to people they knew couldn't pay them back, and when the paybacks didn't come, the system collapses and the taxpayers get it in the neck. American people, the investors get it in the neck. And this system is really in a very fragile condition right now. We could see, another collapse is not out of the question. So how do you avoid that? Well, first of all, you have to avoid any particular entity from becoming too big, because where there is competition, the competition's getting crushed.
Yeah.
Monopolies in any area present real questions and problems.
Oh.
And the more monopolies there are, particularly in areas of so vital as communication, there's democratic values that come into question.
Of course there are. I mean, yeah.
Whether freedom of speech, for example, comes into question.
Yeah, we have these thought police that are deciding what we can see and what we can't see. And, I always like to talk about how you can't hear the dogs that don't bark. You can't form an opinion about something you never hear about,
this is what happens in China.
Okay. Yeah.
And people, their access to the system depends on social credit.
Right.
That is created directly to how they support the system of government. And if they criticize it, their social credit goes this way. They may have trouble getting loans, jobs, promotions.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this form of government that we have, we were given a republic if we can keep it, we were told. And
yeah.
I think
if we can keep it.
Yeah, if we can keep it. And what the book shows is that the division of light and power essentially is about a fight for democratic governance, a challenge to crony capitalism, a challenge to monopoly power, a challenge to monopolies that actually want to dictate government policy.
Yeah.
For themselves.
They have armies of lobbyists, and the government doesn't seem to have any appetite whatsoever to invoke any antitrust prosecutions. I mean, I just cannot believe these companies are allowed to run roughshod over the world, not just the country.
The questions you raise are very deep, and they relate to the structure of our economy. They relate to the role of government as a referee. And unfortunately, in some cases, the game has been thrown because the refs are in on a fix.
Yep.
And that's where the ratepayer, the taxpayer, gets hurt. I am not opposed to business. I think competition is the essence of a democracy. It helps to make, to churn things, to make things happen, improve the quality of products, to spur innovation. But when somebody uses their power to squelch innovation,
yeah,
whoa,
that's exactly what they do. These giant multinational companies are building moats around. I mean, they even say that it's not like a secret. They've got moats around their businesses through regulations, armies of lobbyists, all kinds of favorable treatment, patent trolling.
Absolutely.
I mean, what don't they do? It's
absolutely. Let me give you an
awful.
example from the book, Jason. The city had this utility. It was a smaller utility compared to its competitor. Cleveland was a little bit different. Well, there might be 2,000 municipal utilities. Cleveland is one of the cities where the two utilities, the Cleveland and Municipal Light and the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company, competed side by side. Well, CEI, as it's called, didn't want the competition. They tried to wipe out Muni Light. How did they do it? In the book, I prove, and this is a federal investigation that attested to it, that CEI, in order to take over the public system, was deliberately creating blackouts on the system, and then going into the Muni Light neighborhoods with contracts saying, hey, sign up for our system. You're having a lot of outages lately. Sign up for us.
Right.
We'll even give you free wiring. You don't have to deal with this Muni Light anymore. I mean, it's the kind of dirty tricks that are played. And why did they do it? Because they had monopoly power, and because they felt that, nobody could touch them, because they thought nobody would fight back. Well, hello, sure. I not only fought back, but we saved the system, even though, as you're reading the book, it was at some cost.
Yeah, right. It always is. But Thankfully, there are people who are willing to take on these fights, even though they are costly, no question about it. Dennis, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that the economy was in a precarious condition and there could be another collapse, if you will. And I know you were talking at the time about the Great Recession or the global financial crisis, whatever you want to call it. What would that look like nowadays? And what are some of the warning signs that you're seeing? What are the red alerts, the indicators that we should be concerned with?
Well, it's the financialization of the economy where mergers and acquisitions are occurring and no real wealth no underlying wealth is occurring. It's just that the street keeps valuing these businesses up and up. But, it's like a Potemkin village. There's nothing behind it. There's nothing solid. So that when people start investing in it and they find that there's no underlying structure of wealth that is embedded in the creation of these, it just falls down, and that there's been a tendency towards that, even though you thought we would have learned a lesson with the subprime meltdown where wealth was being pyramided without any underlying firmament. And, there has to be some connection to something material.
Right.
And if all you're doing is playing with numbers, they used to send people to jail for that.
Right. But that's what Wall Street does and has done for decades, right? They just move money around, move numbers around, and sometimes there is, so it's not fair to say no, but rarely there is any actual real value being created, right? Material goods.
And that's where, I see the sign there, empowering investors. That's where investors have to be able to come together and review what's happening. And there have to be, the government should be there as the cop on the beat, making sure that there's no games being played in issuance, and all the rules are there, right? All the SEC has all the rules,
right?
But when are they enforced? Only when there's a big collapse.
Yeah. And they're enforced selectively, sadly.
100%.
Yeah, right.
You're right, 100% right.
Yeah, it's really well, Dennis. Before you go, as we wrap up, just give us a prescription. What should people listening do? What should they look for? Just any action steps. And
well, let me just tell you, the reason why I wrote the book is so people could be aware of where the centers of power are in their community, so they can be aware that if there's something going on in government that you don't understand, it seems to work against you, you can bet it's helping somebody else out. The premise of the book is that government works. The question is, who's it working for? Mm-hmm. And my hope is that this book, The Division of Light and Power, will prove to be a valuable text, not just for a good read of a true to life adventure, but a valuable text to help people explore the nooks and crannies of government decision making, how corporations and their own narrow concerns can impinge on government and government officials, and ultimately how we as citizens can reclaim our power, first of all, by knowing the truth. And, it's always been said that the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
I love that. That's great. And your website is kucinich.us, right?
Well, I've got several. We've the one that I would recommend to people for the book is finneyavenuebooks.com.
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us, are you just totally retired now? You finished your book, or
no? I don't even know that word. That word's not in my lexicon.
Me neither.
I have plenty of fight and spirit left in me, and stay tuned.
Yeah. So we're going to look for something else coming up, right?
I'm ready.
Now that the book is out. Fantastic. I love the spirit. Dennis Kucinich, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to see you, Jason.